From Disney's surprisingly violent Gargoyles to MTV's grotesque nightmare, the Brothers Grunt, the 1990s produced cartoons that would make modern network executives faint. Duckman pushed adult animation into misanthropic territory the Simpsons never dared explore. King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. A football team gets magically transported to medieval Camelot to replace the missing knights of the Round Table. Quarterback Arthur King and his teammates answer Merlin's call to battle Morgana, donning magical armor to fight dragons while shouting constant football references. Kids tuned in expecting knights and swords, but got confused by huddle formations and touchdown celebrations mixed into medieval combat. The animation looked flashy, the toy line filled store shelves, but the writing stayed paper-thin throughout both seasons. One-dimensional characters screamed sports metaphors while swinging enchanted swords at generic villains who lacked any real menace or motivation. Parents questioned the violent battle scenes that felt excessive even by early 90s standards, with magical weapons blasting enemies in ways that seemed designed purely to showcase toy features. Critics slammed it for weak storytelling and transparent marketing that prioritized merchandise over narrative. The show existed in that strange 90s space where anything could get greenlit if executives smelled profit. Today, networks would reject a cartoon so blatantly designed to sell action figures before the pitch meeting ended. It feels more like a parody of lazy 90s animation than a sincere creative effort, yet everyone involved played it completely straight, seemingly unaware of how ridiculous the premise sounded to anyone over 12. Fish Police. CBS adapted this comic book, hoping to swim in the same waters as The Simpsons during animation's primetime gold rush. Anthropomorphic fish wore trench coats, smoked cigars, drank booze, and delivered crime noir punchlines in an underwater city filled with mob bosses and corruption. Executives expected the next animated primetime hit that would capture adult audiences hungry for sophisticated cartoon comedy. Instead, the show sank after just 3 episodes, becoming one of the fastest cancellations in broadcast history. It got caught between two worlds, too adult for kids who stumbled onto it during evening hours, but not sharp enough for grown-ups who expected Simpsons-level writing. Sexual innuendo, organized crime, and femme fatales all swam through family-friendly time slots, and parents' groups complained immediately about content they considered inappropriate. The voice cast included veteran actors who deserved better material than the scripts provided. Networks today would never greenlight gangster fish flirting and gambling in primetime slots, where families might be watching together. Yet this spectacular failure actually predicted the future of adult animation. The themes it explored would later find success in shows like BoJack Horseman, which proved underwater noir could work with the right execution and platform. Capital Critters. When the Gulf War, drug epidemics, and political scandals dominated headlines, ABC greenlit an ambitious show about mice, rats, and cockroaches living inside the White House. Stephen Bachko and Hanna-Barbera collaborated on what they hoped would bring adult themes to animation through an accessible premise. On paper, it promised edgy political satire that would engage parents while entertaining children with cute animal characters. In practice, it delivered confusing tonal whiplash that alienated everyone who watched. Writers tackled racism, gun violence, homelessness, and drug abuse, but wrapped these heavy adult issues in cutesy animal designs marketed toward children who wanted simple entertainment. Parents thought the content inappropriate for the young audiences the animation style attracted. Kids found the political commentary boring and confusing. Critics called the entire concept hypocritical. Trying to educate children about serious issues while using cartoon cockroaches felt tone-deaf at best. ABC pulled the plug after just 7 episodes aired, making it one of the network's most embarrassing animated failures. Imagine pitching a primetime cartoon today where cockroaches debate racial inequality in the Oval Office and mice mourn victims of gun violence. No network executive would approve that meeting. This stands as definitive proof that when cartoons try too hard to be serious about real-world problems, they risk losing every potential viewer in the process. Samurai Pizza Cats. Saban Entertainment imported this anime from Japan without proper translations of the original scripts, a problem that would normally doom any localization effort. Writers improvised solutions, creating brand new dialogue filled with fourth-wall jokes, parodies, and absurd humor that had absolutely nothing to do with the source material. Characters acknowledged they were in a cartoon, mocked their own show's production values, and threw in references to American pop culture that Japanese writers never intended. Kids loved wacky cats in pizza armor fighting villains fans with names like the Big Cheese, while adults caught sly political references and meta-commentary buried in the chaos. The reckless rewriting and anything-goes approach transformed a straightforward action show into something genuinely unique, a localization so wild it became its own creative work. Studios today prioritize cultural sensitivity, copyright restrictions, and respecting original creators' visions above all else. Streaming services demand faithful adaptations because international audiences compare versions in real time on social media. This kind of localization chaos could never happen now. And that's both a good thing for artistic integrity and a loss for the anarchic creativity that made Samurai Pizza Cats a cult classic among animation fans who discovered it. Biker Mice from Mars. Every network wanted its own mutant animal with attitude franchise after Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles exploded into a merchandising phenomenon. This one featured 3 anthropomorphic Martian mice riding motorcycles, fighting evil aliens, and cracking one-liners in leather jackets while destroying everything in their path. Pure 90s excess defined every frame. Heavy metal soundtracks, chrome-plated vehicles, and anti-authority rebellion wrapped in Saturday morning animation packaging. Kids loved it initially, drawn to the cool factor of biker culture filtered through cartoon aliens, but the violence escalated quickly across episodes that seemed determined to push boundaries. Laser battles, explosions, and brutal fisticuffs filled every episode, while parenting groups raised concerns about aggressive content marketed directly at young children. The show existed less for storytelling and more for selling toys. Every vehicle, weapon, and villain seemed designed with action figure potential in mind first and narrative purpose second. Plot existed merely to connect merchandise opportunity. Networks today would reject such transparent commercials dressed as entertainment, especially ones that glorified violence and destruction as entertainment for elementary school audiences. The mice rode into obscurity, remembered only by viewers who absorbed its rebellious attitude during formative years. Exosquad. Human civilization wages war against Neo-Sapiens, genetically engineered workers who rebelled after generations of exploitation and mistreatment by their creators. This serialized space opera depicted concentration camps, civilian massacres, and characters dying permanently with no magical resurrections or last-minute saves. Story arcs carried consequences across entire seasons in ways American animation had never attempted before. Villains had understandable motivations rooted in legitimate grievances about how humans treated them as slaves. Heroes made morally questionable decisions that haunted them in future episodes, dealing with guilt and trauma rather than bouncing back immediately. War wasn't glamorized or treated as adventure. Every episode showed combat as brutal, costly, and psychologically damaging to everyone involved, regardless of which side they fought for. The show explored themes of racism, dehumanization, and cycles of violence with sophistication usually reserved for prestige drama. Critics praised the ambition and mature storytelling that treated young audiences as capable of handling complexity. Parents worried about exposing children to such heavy content during what should have been lighthearted cartoon hours. Streaming platforms today might greenlight similar stories with appropriate age ratings and content warnings, but Saturday morning broadcast slots demand safer, more episodic content that doesn't require viewers to remember previous episodes or process moral ambiguity. Mighty Max. A kid with a magic baseball cap that opens portals worldwide sounds innocent enough. Perfect premise for selling toys to young boys. But this show went shockingly dark in ways that blindsided parents expecting lighthearted adventure. Max faced Lovecraftian horrors, ancient evils, and genuinely terrifying monsters across every episode, dealing with threats that would traumatize adult viewers, let alone children. Characters died and stayed dead in a kids' show, which was virtually unheard of at the time. Norman, Max's immortal Viking guardian, had witnessed centuries of tragedy and spoke about mortality with unsettling casualness that made death feel real rather than abstract. Virgil, his foul mentor, approached dangerous situations with cold pragmatism about who might not survive. The series finale delivered genuine bleakness that offered no easy comfort before providing a time loop reset that felt earned rather than cheap. Critics appreciated the mature storytelling hidden within what looked like standard action figure fare. Parents didn't always realize what their kids were absorbing between commercials for the very toys the show existed to sell. A show that is willing to traumatize young viewers with existential dread about mortality and cosmic horror wouldn't clear standards and practices today. The Tick. Absurd superhero parody filled every episode with characters so ridiculous they'd generate immediate lawsuits in today's litigious entertainment landscape. The Tick himself spouted philosophical nonsense while being completely invulnerable to harm, a big blue idiot who genuinely wanted to fight evil but lacked any understanding of how the world actually worked. Supporting characters included Die Fledermaus, a cowardly Batman parody who fled from actual danger, and American Maid, who was Wonder Woman in everything but name and copyright clearance. Writers mocked every superhero trope while creating genuinely memorable original concepts that influenced parody for decades afterward. Fourth wall breaks and meta-commentary saturated scripts that assumed audiences understood comic book conventions well enough to appreciate subversion. Networks worried about lawsuit potential from obvious parodies even during the 90s when copyright enforcement seemed less aggressive. The show never found mainstream success despite enthusiastic critical acclaim from animation fans who recognized its genius. Today's entertainment lawyers would demand either official licenses from DC and Marvel or significant character redesigns before production could begin. The Tick's freewheeling mockery of established superhero properties couldn't survive legal review in an era where billion-dollar franchises aggressively protect their intellectual property. Street Sharks. Jawsome became the catchphrase defining this blatant Ninja Turtles knockoff that didn't even try to hide its influence. Four brothers transformed into half-human, half-shark hybrids after an evil scientist experimented on them against their will, giving them superhuman strength and an insatiable appetite for destruction. They fought crime by punching through concrete walls, eating everything in sight with their massive jaws, and causing property damage that would bankrupt any real city's infrastructure budget. The premise made no scientific sense whatsoever. Sharks can't survive on land, muscles don't work that way, and none of it mattered because plot existed solely to justify action. Sequences. Scripts served as thin excuses for fight scenes and toy promotion that executives hoped would capture Turtles' money. Critics dismissed it as derivative cash grab material that insulted children's intelligence. Parents complained about mindless violence and obvious commercialism that taught kids nothing except brand loyalty. Yet kids ate it up anyway, literally chanting "Jawsome" on playgrounds nationwide and begging for the action figures prominently featured in every episode. Today's standards demand more from children's entertainment than mutant sharks punching things while toy logos flash subliminally. Gargoyles. Gothic, violent, and Shakespearean, Disney produced something completely unlike their typical afternoon fare that challenged assumptions about what animated shows could accomplish. Medieval creatures awakened in modern Manhattan after 1,000 years of stone sleep, dealing with betrayal, mortality, and complex moral questions across serialized story arcs that rewarded dedicated viewers. Characters died and stayed dead in ways that carried emotional weight. Villains had sympathetic motivations rooted in genuine grievances that made them more than simple obstacles for heroes to punch. Writers adapted Macbeth and A Midsummer Night's Dream with surprising fidelity, trusting young audiences to appreciate Shakespeare filtered through superhero action. Star Trek actors voiced several characters in a running casting joke that delighted older viewers catching episodes with their kids. Gunfire, blood, and genuine menace filled episodes that also explored prejudice and persecution as humans feared and hunted the gargoyles despite their heroic intentions. Critics praised the ambition while noting it treated young audiences with unusual respect, never talking down or simplifying complexity. The series influenced Disney's approach to serialized animation for years afterward. A live-action reboot has been discussed for over a decade, with everyone acknowledging that the original's dark tone and mature themes need extremely careful handling for modern family audiences. Animaniacs. The Warner siblings, Yakko, Wakko, and Dot, existed solely to torment everyone around them while breaking every fourth wall imaginable with gleeful abandon. Locked in the Warner Brothers water tower since the 1930s for being too zany, they escaped to wreak havoc across Hollywood and anywhere else writers wanted to send them. Scripts mocked real public figures by name without permission, parodied current events without fear, and buried innuendo that went completely over children's heads while making parents choke on their coffee during family viewing time. Slappy Squirrel solved every problem with dynamite and verbal abuse, embodying a cranky elderly cartoon character who had absolutely no filter and resented modern animation trends. Pinky and the Brain plotted world domination nightly, with schemes satirizing everything from politics to pop culture to scientific hubris. Educational segments taught geography through earworm melodies that people still remember word for word decades later, proving entertainment and education could coexist brilliantly. Legal departments today would demand rewrites on nearly every episode before broadcast approval. Standards and practices would flag countless gags as problematic for various political and social reasons. Celebrities might sue over unflattering portrayals that the original show deployed without hesitation. Even its Hulu revival struggled to match the original's anarchic energy, despite having the same creative team, proving that television's risk tolerance had fundamentally changed. Earthworm Jim. Gross-out absurdist comedy based on a video game about a worm in a supersuit attracted viewers who wanted something completely unhinged and weren't getting it elsewhere. Jim fought villains with names like Professor Monkey for a head and Queen Slug for a butt across episodes defined by juvenile humor and constant cartoonish violence that never let up for breath. Fourth wall breaks interrupted plots randomly as characters acknowledged their own absurdity before diving back into chaos. Surreal tangents took stories in directions that had nothing to do with established premises, rewarding attention deficits rather than punishing them. Critics either loved the manic energy that refused to take anything seriously, or dismissed the entire production as incomprehensible noise that failed basic storytelling requirements. The show couldn't compete with more polished offerings that delivered coherent narratives alongside their entertainment, and it faded into obscurity after limited runs. A property this relentlessly weird, deliberately ugly, and proudly juvenile wouldn't survive development meetings today, where executives demand broad appeal and merchandising potential. It remains a cult curiosity for animation historians, studying how far 90s cartoons pushed boundaries before anyone pushed back. Skeleton Warriors. Gothic aesthetics and bone-armored villains made this show look like a heavy metal album cover come to terrifying life on Saturday morning television. A mystical crystal that could corrupt human souls turned characters into skeletal monsters, loyal to an evil prince who sought absolute power through darkness. The animation quality impressed critics who expected cheaper production values from toy-based programming. Violence stayed intense for morning fare aimed at children eating cereal. Characters died, stakes felt genuinely threatening, and victories came at real cost. Writers took the premise seriously rather than winking at audiences, which created an atmosphere of dread unusual for the time slot. Critics noted the ambition, but questioned whether children should absorb such relentless darkness between commercials for sugary breakfast products. The toy line struggled despite impressive character designs, because parents hesitated buying skeleton warriors for young kids. Network support evaporated quickly when merchandise numbers disappointed expectations. A show this atmospherically bleak and visually disturbing wouldn't clear children's programming standards today regardless of animation quality, and it remains forgotten except by horror enthusiasts who discovered it during their formative years. Freakazoid. A teenager gets sucked into the internet and emerges as a manic, fourth-wall-breaking superhero who makes Deadpool look restrained by comparison. Steven Spielberg's production team crammed random songs, celebrity mockery, and surreal non-sequiturs into every episode with no regard for coherent storytelling or traditional narrative structure. Fans loved the absurdist humor that rewarded attention while punishing anyone expecting conventional superhero adventures. Mainstream audiences sat bewildered, unable to follow chaos that seemed designed to confuse rather than entertain. Ratings stayed weak because marketing teams couldn't explain a show that veered between slapstick, pointed satire, and complete randomness within single scenes, sometimes within single jokes. Writers relied heavily on parodying real people, media properties, and political figures without permission or apology, trusting that humor would protect them from legal consequences. Today's risk-averse entertainment climate would flag mocking celebrities and copyright-sensitive franchises as too controversial for any children's programming. Slot. Network lawyers would kill half the jokes before animation began. Freakazoid developed a cult following among animation fans who appreciated its absolute refusal to play by any rules whatsoever, but it never found the mainstream success its creativity deserved. The Head. MTV's Oddities block produced body horror nightmares for teenagers who wanted animation that disturbed rather than comforted, and this show delivered exactly that premise. Jim starts as an ordinary man whose head suddenly swells to massive proportions because an alien named Roy moved inside his skull without permission or explanation. Together, they attempt to stop an extraterrestrial invasion of Earth while dealing with grotesque imagery and psychological trauma that would give adults nightmares. Episodes explored paranoia about bodily autonomy, identity crisis when you're sharing your brain with another another consciousness, and government conspiracies that treated viewers as capable of handling ambiguity. The animation reveled in disturbing visuals designed specifically to unsettle anyone watching, bulging heads, alien appendages, and transformations that lingered on uncomfortable details. Critics praised the originality and willingness to tackle genuinely weird concepts. They also acknowledged mainstream audiences would feel disturbed rather than entertained by content this aggressively strange. Networks today avoid anything psychologically unsettling aimed at younger viewers, and the head's target demographic of edgy teenagers has largely migrated to platforms with different content standards. The grotesque body horror visuals alone would kill any pitch meeting before the concept even got explained. WildC.A.T.s Image Comics redefined superheroes with darker, edgier characters during the early 90s boom, and naturally someone decided to cash in with a Saturday morning cartoon adaptation. Covert operatives fought alien wars with lots of laser battles across episodes that stripped away the comics' gore and sexuality to meet broadcast standards, leaving a neutered version that satisfied nobody. Kids felt confused by complex mythology they had no context for. Comic fans felt disappointed by sanitized versions of characters they loved specifically for mature content. Animation stayed stiff throughout production. Writing felt clunky and rushed, as if nobody involved actually cared about quality. Merchandise underwhelmed retailers who expected another X-Men phenomenon. Critics called it a transparent corporate attempt to ride X-Men, the animated series' success without investing the nuance, care, or budget that made Fox's show work. Cancellation came after a single forgettable season. Modern audiences expect layered storytelling, careful character development, and emotional stakes from superhero content, not half-baked, toy-driven adaptations of hyper-violent source material, stripped of everything that made the source interesting. Rovers. Warner Brothers thought they had gold with this pitch. Genetically engineered dogs who transformed into humanoid superheroes, saving the world between cracking wise and wagging tails in action-packed adventures. German shepherds, collies, and retrievers wore battle armor while fighting villains like General Parvo, across episodes that seemed designed for young audiences who loved both pets and superheroes. But beneath the goofy premise lurked surprisingly dark undertones that made parents uncomfortable when they paid attention. The dogs started as ordinary pets who scientists experimented on without consent, hinting at themes of animal cruelty and genetic manipulation that felt inappropriate for Saturday morning. Humor stayed loaded with innuendo, fourth-wall jokes, and political satire that sailed completely over children's heads while occasionally landing awkwardly for adult viewers. Critics couldn't determine who the show was actually made for. Too violent and thematically strange for kids, but not sharp or sophisticated enough for adults seeking clever animation. Parents complained specifically about the bizarre mix of goofy slapstick and unsettling implications about what happened to these animals. Warner Brothers canceled it after one season when ratings disappointed, and nobody could figure out how to market something so tonally confused. Invasion America. Steven Spielberg wanted to bring cinematic seriousness to American animation, proving the medium could handle mature science fiction drama as effectively as any live-action production. He created a primetime series that felt more like prestige television than Saturday morning fare. Teenage David Carter discovers he's half human, half alien, destined to lead Earth's defense against extraterrestrial invasion, whether he wants that responsibility or not. The tone stayed grim and consequential throughout every episode. Violence hit intense levels rarely seen in American animation. Characters died, battles had real casualties, and victory never came easily. Serialized narrative demanded viewer commitment across episodes, punishing anyone who missed installments or tuned in casually. Kids found it too slow, complex, and lacking the action payoffs they expected from animated programming. Adults dismissed it as just a cartoon, unworthy of their primetime attention, despite production values that rivaled anything on network television. Ratings suffered until executives quietly canceled it after one season of disappointing numbers. Primetime networks have since abandoned animated dramas entirely outside adult comedy blocks on cable. The violence, mature themes about war and destiny, and expensive animation budgets Spielberg required wouldn't survive today's approval process for broadcast television. The Brothers Grunt. MTV wanted to push beyond music videos into original programming, and they created this ugly, grotesque nightmare that seemed designed specifically to test audience tolerance for discomfort. Pale, muscle-bound humanoids searched for their missing brother Perry while communicating primarily through grunts, moans, and disturbing bodily noises. The grunts wore nothing but tiny briefs across episodes designed to disturb rather than entertain in any conventional sense. Danny Antonucci created this before redeeming himself with Ed, and Eddie, and the series gained gained immediate infamy for grotesque animation and nonsensical storytelling that defied any attempt at interpretation or enjoyment. Critics blasted it as unwatchable, a nightmare disguised as comedy that failed at being either scary or funny. Parents who accidentally encountered it while their teenagers watched MTV complained loudly about content that seemed actively hostile to viewers. Even MTV's supposedly edgy teen audience recoiled from the aggressively unpleasant aesthetic that offered no rewards for attention. Unlike shows that pushed boundaries through clever writing or subversive humor, this pushed boundaries simply by existing in its repulsive form. It wasn't funny, wasn't heartwarming, wasn't interesting, and certainly wasn't safe for anyone seeking entertainment. It existed purely to disturb and succeeded too well at that singular goal while failing at everything else. No platform today, broadcast, cable, or streaming, would approve something this grotesque for any audience demographic. Duckman. USA Network took a massive creative risk by airing this crude, self-loathing, womanizing private detective who happened to be a cartoon duck with absolutely no redeeming qualities. Jason Alexander voiced this deeply flawed character through cases that existed mainly as excuses for social commentary and bitter humor that spared nobody. Writers aimed squarely at adults with raunchy jokes, cynical satire, and dark themes delivered through distinctive, grimy animation that matched the protagonist's miserable worldview. Scripts tackled politics, morality, and human failings with shocking frankness that broadcast networks wouldn't touch. Celebrity mockery, government criticism, and social commentary landed with biting wit that drew blood from sacred cows across the political spectrum. The protagonist stayed deliberately unlikable throughout every episode, brilliant for viewers who appreciated dark comedy, unbearable for anyone expecting sympathetic characters. Jason Alexander channeled the same neurotic energy he brought to Seinfeld, but amplified it with vulgarity, despair, and genuine cruelty toward everyone around him. Unlike The Simpsons, which balanced satire with heartwarming family moments, this show leaned fully into misanthropy without offering comfort or redemption. No heartwarming dynamic existed underneath the cynicism. The show genuinely believed people were terrible and celebrated that ugliness rather than critiquing it. Networks today would run screaming from something this edgy and mean-spirited. Streaming platforms might take a chance, but broadcast and basic cable would reject the pitch immediately. It proved animation could deliver adult commentary as sharp and uncomfortable as any live-action satire, while being ugly, mean, and brutally honest in ways that made everyone squirm. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.